AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner. The automotive industry continues to evolve, and so do the opportunities to define it. Borg Warner, one of the world's most admired companies, gets partners where they need to go. Let's do something big together.
Everybody, doing AutoLine After Hours. Gary, we got another show to do. Today we do. And no shortage of topics to talk about. You have a long list there. You got a longer list than I do. Yes. Well, this is why we brought. There's a lot of news. This is why we brought Brinley back from S&P Global because global mobility. Excuse me. Sorry about mobility. Stephanie, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Gary, where do we start? I mean, there's so much to talk about. What's happened in the last week? Well, I mean, I think that we can't not start by talking about gas prices, which sort of like is a predicate to everything in a way that we'll be talking about today, because there are a lot of ramifications beyond what we're seeing at the pump. So, according to AAA, today's gasoline was $3.98 national average. Regular fuel, literally $1 a gallon more than it was 1 month. Stephanie, what do you think? Is it going to have an effect?
This doesn't scare me as much as something.
Really? All right. So basically, like you hear something creepy outside your house, and you're like, "Oh, I'm sort of scared." But then when when you hear this pounding on the door, you get more scared.
The longer this thing goes, we're getting to a scenario perhaps hitting $200 a barrel is impossible. It's a little bit more concerning. It just builds on itself. And so going from $1 to $1 a month, if the situation was resolved relatively quickly and we did start seeing more traffic through the streets, then it could be more of a blip. But if it gets worse, it's going to get worse, and it's going to get more expensive. And the big snap on is really, as much as fuel prices pump, it's the knock on into everything that starts to take hold longer than it stays on. So I'm more interested in seeing things ramp up, and not have any control over that, but and seeing things settle down. Then I am really concerned about the fact that it's
So, what do you think will happen if gasoline prices stay high? Is it going to affect sales, or is it going to affect the mix of sales?
It's going to affect sales.
So you think sales will go down?
Yeah.
People just hold off because of the
Combination of people will hold off and get and try to look at it if we use car market. We might see a bit of a mix change, but even though hybrids are less expensive than electric, and like the gap between gas and hybrid used to be, there's still a gap. And even if you want to decide to go electric because the gas prices are coming up, if you don't have an electric, that's still a pretty big investment. It's not just the $4,000 to $5,000 more.
You buy a used one, and you get it cheap.
Or it's also the and if you buy a used one, then you're also not affecting the car sales.
That's right. No, that's true.
And yes, you could buy these.
But how long does this have to last? I mean, so let's say for argument, I mean, it's gone on for a few weeks now. Prices have gone up. Are we talking about 6 months, 8 months, a year? Or
that's the big question. When does that start building up again? And I just, but if it sustains, and if oil prices continue to go up, then ultimately again, everything is a plastic that we buy is expensive. Getting food to the grocery store is more expensive. Eating your home is more expensive. And by the way, if it gets really bad, and you stay within 6 months or a year or something in that time frame, then you definitely have more inflation. Then you definitely have these signals of insurance interest rates coming down, reversing or holding. So there's macroeconomic factors here that are way more troubling to me than a dollar down in the last quarter.
But they're invisible to the time being.
They don't have to be. They're not invisible. They have to be.
Well, I'll contest that. Well, first we have to say that Gabrielle Coppola from Bloomberg has joined the show. Great to have you here. Probably the never.
Yeah.
We're talking about the war. We're talking about the impact on gas prices and beyond that. So I think we're seeing an impact right now. Diesel is $5 a gallon across the country. Truckers are pulling their hair out. And I did a little bit of research, and I got to believe automakers and suppliers are pulling their hair out. You know, they had COVID, they had the chip shortage, they had all kinds of problems that they had to deal with. Their, a ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal at one point a few years ago. So their supply chain, and now tariffs, of course, ripping up the supply chain. So here's what they've got to be looking at based on my basic research here. Oil, which we've been talking about. Also lubricants, which that's where they come from. Also fuels that we've been talking about, diesel, petrol, or gasoline. Aluminum, there's a lot of aluminum that's made in LNG, natural gas, that is used to power, especially in Europe.
A lot of plants. Helium, that is needed for making computer chips. And then, we touched on this, feedstocks, which comes from oil to be able to make plastics. So I got to believe if you're at an automaker now or a supplier, you have got to be looking at all kinds of scenarios as to how is this going to affect my supply chain? When is it going to impact? What kind of workarounds do I have? Do I have a workaround? Can I go, if I'm a supplier to an automaker, and say, hey, I need pricing help on this? I mean, it's a total mess right now.
And I'm sure they're all looking at all of those things. And the helium, from talking to our chip people, the understanding is that they've got about 6 months. So we think it's going to be May-ish before the sort of panic starts to set in of where do I get it. And that's the other thing. One of the interesting things about looking at this is how long does it last? You don't really know. But one of the things that happens is the longer that it goes, the supply chain starts to reroute around that and find alternate sources, which of course will be more expensive than what we've got. So we still have a cost problem. But if you look at something that sustains a year and a half, then I think to a large degree, where you get the supplies will reroute and it'll sort itself out again at a higher cost.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, sorry, real quick. Had an audio issue to where it defaulted to the microphone on the computer, and the audio sounded terrible up until just about now.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, some people in the comments have said stuff that the audio was bad. I think we lost a couple of people because of that. I don't know if there's a way to maybe start back from a little bit before, or if you just want to acknowledge this and continue on. But there was.
So they're working now.
There was audio before. It just sounded like you were underwater because it was picking it up from the computer over there.
Oh, what a mess.
It's hard to repeat.
Yeah,
We should just keep the show going.
This is terrible. I wonder if we should just cancel this and start all over.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Can you delete everything that we've got and just start a new show?
No, people are saying keep it going.
Keep it going. Okay.
The people have spoken.
They'd rather hear us glug, glug, glug.
Yeah. So
Okay. So there are all these things, and there'll be like a later effect. So Gabriella, I mean, what's your sense when you're talking to people out in the real world about how they're dealing with this, whether they're, at companies of the automotive stripe or others?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, just yesterday I reached out to someone to catch up and have a chat. They said, gotta go, I have a customer with a helium crisis right now. And I was like, what? And, I think I've become a bit desensitized because like the auto industry has been through so much. I mean, it's already kind of an industry that's not for the faint of heart. And you've had the pandemic, the chip crisis. Even before the pandemic, there was rubber, there's memory chips, there's the fire at the Ford supplier up in upstate New York. It's like people live with an automatic, like, it just feel like there's never been a time where there wasn't chaos. And it's just sort of whether it's China squeezing our supply chains or now, war in Iran, it's just like it never lets up. So, but I mean, I do think that, it's been said that like this year is the year that in terms of like, there's no more absorbing the cost for consumers. Like the automakers can't do that
so
anymore.
the tariff costs that they were eating now, so
they're
they
starting
probably
to bleed through.
So they probably took the people off the, working on the tariffs and moved them over to, dealing with supply chains from what you just enumerated.
Yeah.
Most of them probably have a perpetual supply chain war room going.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think they ever took it down.
They never
like,
took
it's
it
just,
down.
They didn't get a break. They didn't.
This is the new
down.
normal in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, to your point about the gas prices, that that's a very prevalent question right now, and everyone's like, someone who is going to buy a new truck with a Hemi engine that was all excited about that, do they care? If they were going to buy a truck at this price, do they really care? Is it going to affect a new car purchase? Like I think Stephanie said, it takes longer, but in terms of the strain and the stress on the industry, that
That's
and just more money they're not going to be able to make to plow into investment. They just took these huge write-downs on electric vehicles, tariff costs, moving their supply chains, rerouting them out of China, all these, if they could just concentrate on, innovating and investing and making cool cars, that would be great. But that there's so much other noise out there. This Iran thing, if it keeps,
if it keeps
looks really
based on what I've read and talked to people about, even if the war ended this afternoon, it would take months, not 2 months, many months for everything to settle down and get back to where it was.
Oh, wow.
We've seen this before.
Yeah.
I mean, how long did it take after COVID, right? This is a smaller example of that in terms of not everything is going, wasn't shut down the same way it was right after COVID, but, it took us, a year and a half to get shifts back where they needed to be and kind of get things back running. So yes, there's absolutely going to be a couple months of rejiggering where ships are supposed to be and where things are. That is going to have to happen. It's going to be a gradual recovery.
But the difference this time though is, things have been blown up. Okay,
that's
and so it's not like this is in an inconvenient place.
It's like, we just opened it back.
Agree.
Yeah.
And some of that we don't have full visibility into till it's done.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that some energy assets have
like that LNG operations in Qatar, like they said, it'll be years.
It'll be years before that system is back up and running. So yes, and I haven't gotten into that because it kind of goes outside my area, but there's a whole lot that you bomb a place for a couple of months, and it's going to take time to recover from that.
Okay, enough of the war for now. We've talked enough about that. Another big bomb that dropped this week, though, is Honda announcing it's dropping Afeela. Gabrielle, what do you think?
I mean, I think that, this just feels like we've been waiting for shoes to drop all year, right? Yeah, you're right that maybe what took them so long, but it's just sort of like waiting, we saw GM, Ford, then Stellantis topped them, and, it's going to come out sooner or later. I was just looking at, some of the things that my colleagues in Japan have written about this, and they say that, it's just the price of putting all your eggs in that one basket, right? They put all these eggs in the EV basket, and they don't have as many hybrids in their lineup as Toyota does. They're not as competitive. Like, you could screw up on EVs, but at least if you kept the flywheel spinning on your ICE business, or like you could keep all the other plates spinning, you're okay. And some companies have been able to do that better than others. But I think that there was interesting change. I was just reading about this. Like, there was a decision to separate vehicle development from R&D at Honda,
right?
Like years back,
right?
And there's a case to be made that somehow sort of handicapped their ability to make more innovative, competitive vehicles, and that if you take away the EV charges, which they're certainly not alone in suffering that. There are other problems with that's why I'm talking about keeping the other plates spinning, you know? So
Well, one of the stories, I think it was Bloomberg, in fact, carried today, is that Honda's running into real trouble with motorcycle sales because the Chinese are eating their lunch on that, especially with electric bikes. And that's where the scooter and the motorcycle business is headed, is electric. And that's the motorcycle side of the business is what kept Honda up recently, financially speaking. And now they're running into problems with that. And all of a sudden, this great company that has made terrific products and powertrains and all that, and a wide variety of non-automotive products, looks like it's in trouble.
Wow.
So Stephanie, so the Sony Honda company, it'll still exist, right? Well, I mean,
Sony and Honda will still exist. What happens to the JV? They're still starting to work.
So did the market need another $90,000 plus EV that didn't have all that great in the way of specs?
No.
So what was your assessment? I mean, they've been talking about this. They've been at CES. They've been showing this thing.
On a very personal level, I was never a fan of the Afeela. From the first CES presentation, I was like, what are we doing here? This is just a question nobody is asking. And then as it came through, and it was only going to be a few stores in California, and it was going to be $95,000. And of course, it wasn't quite as autonomous as they imagined that it could be and would eventually be. I'm like, we just don't need this. So I'm not all that sad to see Afeela go. I do wish that Honda was able to bring those EVs to market, even if it was a struggle.
It's EVs, not the Afeela EVs.
And the Afeela thing was just noise in the system, honestly. You know, it was a product that was going to have a really hard time finding any real home. And there's too many cars out there. There's enough of cars out there. You don't really need it. So it didn't feel like it had a great chance of success from the beginning. But the Honda, to your point about splitting vehicle development and R&D, when I look at Honda stepping away from that, one of the things that I see is that also means the ASIMO operating system is now not being put into play. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to put that on another ICE vehicle at some point, but that software-defined vehicle technology is pretty important within the automotive space, and it's a big setback for Honda to not be able to deploy that and start working on that, regardless of the EV. So I think that there's, from a technology and a competitiveness standpoint, I think it could be a bigger problem for Honda to have dropped this than they realized.
There's only one good thing coming out of this for Honda. Now its dealers will not sue it for trying to sell Afeela cars direct to consumers.
How many brands have we seen fall on that knife? I mean, like Volkswagen bit off more than I'm sorry, not Volkswagen, Scout, different, I mean, it's like.
That's going to keep going back and forth. I mean, and you open the gates, they let Tesla do it. So it doesn't matter how long it's going to take, but I don't know that dealers are going to win with Scout.
So John, to the point of Honda, though, I mean, so last year we were talking about the possible Honda-Nissan merger. Might that come back?
It could come back, because there was a great story in Automotive News of a meeting of JAMA, the Japanese Automobile Manufacturers Association. And they got their hair on fire because they are losing sales and market share, especially in the global South right now, to Chinese automakers. And remember, if you look at Southeast Asia, Japanese automakers had, I want to say, 75 to 80% market share. So you're talking of them losing millions of units of capacity to the Chinese. And so they're deeply, deeply worried. And JAMA is saying, hey, all us Chinese or Japanese automakers, we got to work together. We got to collaborate. And they've got this effort to commonize components across the line, across the industry. So, it's not just Toyota trying to share components within the Toyota group. They want all automakers to do this. And of course, that's a page right out of the Chinese playbook, because the Chinese have done this commonized all kinds of commodity components under an organization. It's CATARC. It's CARTC,
Heard of that.
and it's the China Automotive Technology, I
Yeah.
think, research, something or other. But it has set specs for everything that's a commodity, whether it's windshield wiper motors or hinges for doors or whatever.
Okay,
it is.
so wait a minute. So you're saying that if you buy a Geely and you buy a BYD, they will have the same windshield wiper motor.
I'm not saying that they do. There's
But-
a very good chance they're the same. Very
or
good
same
chance.
specification, which still
Right.
when it
And
comes
so
to
there,
supply.
there's two benefits to commonizing commodity. And when I say commodities, I mean things that are under the skin, stuff that the customer never sees or touches or experiences.
Mm.
And so if you commonize these commodity components, you get massive economies of scale, i.e. your costs go way down. But the more important thing in my view is that when you're developing a new car, if you're an engineer who can just pull all these components off the shelf, you just saved a ton of design time. And by the way, these are components that have been validated, certified. You know the suppliers, you know what the price is. And this is a key part of why the Chinese are so fast at product development. You know, everybody talks about the 996, you know, they work from 9 a.m.
Yeah.
to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. I don't think that's nearly as important as this parts commonization is in terms of shrinking down your product development time.
Yeah. They're doing a lot of off the shelf. Just give me brakes. They say Bravo on them. Cool. Let's do that. And that's working. It's saving a ton of time. That is a lot of it.
It's so ironic though it seems like kind of paradoxical that we're talking about how the Chinese are eating everybody's lunch, and then these same companies, most of them are not making money.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, it's just
How do they buy that lunch?
yeah, right, exactly. You know, I mean, it's just such a weird thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree, but it's we say, oh, they're so unbeatable, and then you look at their own market, and it's a mess.
No, that's a good point, Gabrielle.
Yeah.
There's going to be a collapse of the Chinese auto industry. Now, there will, amongst the smoldering ruins, there's probably going to be a handful or two handfuls of automakers that survive, and they are going to have enormous economies of scale, and they're going to be extremely powerful. But you're right, most Chinese car companies do not make a profit. And the ones that are starting to get to profitability, I believe, are doing it largely on exports because they can charge a lot more for those cars overseas than they can in their own price war driven market.
Right. Yeah.
They can, and they still have to deal with tariffs. So most markets, they have tariffs on exports. And it's helping. The interesting thing is when they do build more plants in fill in the blank country, because they've got so much overcapacity at home. So there's a contradiction there, right? We've got so much overcapacity at home that we need to export in order to deal with this capacity. But then we also need to build locally to get around tariffs, to get around all sorts of other things.
Add more capacity.
Right.
And you look at Europe being completely overcapacitized, right? And you're like, wait a second, we're going to have way more capacity than we need. We already do.
We already do.
We already
right.
do.
Yeah.
And so there's a correction that's going to come in that regard as well.
Wow. So then it's like thinking about how do you survive that? Like you said, when you come from the ashes, who's surviving among the Chinese players, but how do Japanese, Korean, what's the strategy? And when you were talking about the common components, maybe it's just I covered Chrysler or Stellantis, but sharing things and only differentiating on the things the customer feels or that make or define to your brand. That's from Confessions of a Capital Junkie. I mean, we've talked about this for years and years and years in the auto industry. It's just not, we're not centralized enough, I think, or the mentality. We're so diverse in our, different cultures of different companies. They come from different countries.
I would put it differently. I think it comes down to corporate ego. We don't need to share with those other companies. We're the best. We have the best designs, the best it's pure ego, I believe.
I mean, that's infused with culture, I think.
It's infused with culture.
Right.
And there's silly things, like we can't get lighting homologated
Why?
across regions.
Oh,
I know.
for like regulatory red tape type stuff.
European won't agree with Canada, won't agree with the
Well,
US.
that's a
won't
trade
agree-
issue. That's a trade
it's not
issue.
just a trade issue. I'm talking about the vehicle safety standards. Like there's
Right.
different.
No, I know, but
requirements.
I met a trade official this year who was talking about, oh, we're working very hard to get the U.S. standards of homologation adopted by Saudi Arabia, or something like that. So it's actually like these regulatory things are also a
They
tool
create trade issues.
to are used as a trade for trade leverage and things like that too.
Yeah, but do you think for a second NHTSA is going to say, you know what? Why don't we close down and we'll just use the European safety standards?
Yeah,
That's
That's
it's
not
never
gonna
going to happen. And vice versa. The
Right.
European regulators are never going to say, you know what? The Americans are ahead of us in safety. We ought to adopt their rule. They're never going to do that.
They aren't, and it's partially ego, right? But it's also partially that there are differences. If you think about pedestrian safety standards that sort of started more in Europe, and we've adopted some of them, we don't have the density of cities that Europe does, and pedestrian accidents were a bigger problem there.
Mm.
So it was something that was specific or more specific
Or
to that
walking.
region.
Yeah.
Or walking.
Okay,
yeah.
but let's pick something that's common. Lighting, to your
Lighting
point.
should be.
You know, these pixel headlamps that
Yeah,
close down the pixels that might blind an oncoming driver.
right. That shouldn't be so
What-
hard.
That should have been approved 10 years ago in
I
this
know.
country.
And it was approved like 2 years ago, and it's still like 2 automakers have them.
And look,
On
and
the
here's
road
the
in
other
the
thing.
US,
It
I
takes
should say.
NHTSA 7 years to write a safety
Yeah.
standard. That, to me, in my book, that's inexcusable. People are getting hurt. People are getting killed. And the regulators, and their hands are kind of tied because this is the procedure that they
Right.
have to follow.
Mhm.
But it's time to rip it up and start over.
It is. It has been for a while.
Ain't going to happen.
No.
All right, we were talking about building more plants, and Toyota announced this week that they're spending $1 billion in the U.S. on factories, Georgetown and their plant in Indiana.
And remember, this is just 1 billion of 10 billion that they have committed before the end of the decade.
Well, they announced at the end of 2025 that they're spending $912 million
Yep. So we've spent $2 billion
for increasing hybrid production.
Hybrid, yeah.
So
battery production.
what do you think, John? $800 million being spent at the Georgetown plant.
Look, can Toyota increase sales in the United States? You bet it can. Does it want to build them here and not have to import them from Japan or Mexico or Canada and avoid the tariffs? You bet it does. But, and this is something I don't hear any automotive executive talking about. When you look at robotaxis, they're popping up in cities all over the world right now. And Boston Consulting Group did a study that they say by 2035, which in automotive terms is just a couple of design cycles away, that there could be anywhere from 700,000 to 3 million robotaxis operating in the world. And I'll just say, to make the math easy, one robotaxi can probably replace 4 cars.
Are you
I think it
sure?
can replace a lot more than that, but
I'm skeptical.
you're skeptical of what? That they're
That
going to catch
replaces
on?
the
Or,
car, or that they'll
That
be
replaces 4 cars.
well, think about this. It's not going to replace primary cars for people who have them. But if you are a household that has a second car, maybe even a third car, maybe you don't need that now.
Depends on why you have that second or third car.
argue with him. I will do it otherwise.
I mean, I had 3 cars at one point and sure didn't need 3 cars because they were fun.
Because you can afford it. But there's a lot of families for whom paycheck to paycheck is the reality. And if you can go to them and say, you know what, if you give up that car and all the maintenance and all the insurance and all the fuel that you're putting into it, and you only pay for your miles as you need them, I can save you $3,000 to $5,000 a year. There's going to be households that say, sign me up right now.
I'm not convinced I'll save that much. And still, it's where's that use time going to be? What are you replacing? What were you doing with the second car that you didn't need it, and now you can go someplace else with it? So that's kind of
high congested cities. Let's say New York.
Not where? New York doesn't own cars
You don't have a
anyway.
car
That's the
no,
point.
Yeah.
Drive down any street in New York. Each side of the curb is
It's
lined
congested
with
with
cars.
taxis or
Lined
people who
with
are
cars.
coming through, but most people who live in New York City, having a car is not necessary, and it's more of a huge hassle. You have to move it for the street cleaners, the parking, it's
Right.
Congestion charges.
It's congested, but those are people coming in from New Jersey or
Right.
Long
And yet-
Island or something. Yeah,
There's lots of cars in New York City.
there are.
And I think robotaxis that are far cheaper than taxis or ride hailing could
And
make
we're
people
not
say,
there
you know what,
yet.
I'm going to use that.
I think that there's potential for it to grow, and certainly it'll change the dynamic. I just am not as optimistic that it's going to grow as high as you think it's going to grow.
Or is it going to
Okay,
displace new car
I'm
sales?
quoting Boston Consulting Group. I'm quoting McKinsey that also says this is going to be a
300,
huge
between
disruptor.
700 and 3 million.
They said
and
that
3
the
million
last
in
time we had an
China's
AV hype
huge.
cycle too. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I know, but the AVs weren't ready then. Now they are.
Are they?
Are they? I mean, talk to Waymo.
I mean, there's still
talk
like
to,
phantom drivers that intervening in case something goes wrong. I mean, they're not truly. I mean,
Not
you
quite
know,
ready. But
Tesla
they're
has
getting
been marketing full self-driving since how long, right? And it's not.
and it's not right.
But I mean, no argument with for me that it's progressing and
Yeah.
it's getting better. But another question to think about and all that I think is so interesting is more about generational differences and cultural tastes.
Mhm.
I've talked to friends who are auto engineers who say they're really worried that like younger generations just don't have the passion for driving or the passion for cars that people who grew up with like older generations do. And it's not about, I mean, because again, there was this whole thing, we've seen this before, everyone's going to have a shared Uber. They don't want, kids don't want to get driver's license. That is a very like urban coastal perspective that doesn't speak to the realities of like the majority of America. People need to be able to get around cheaply, safely. So maybe that'll be an autonomous Uber or, you know, a Waymo, I don't know. But I just think I'm like, one thing I'm really watching is this generation really different? I mean, can they not afford? I mean, you know, people are more pessimistic about being able to do things like buy a house or a home. But even do they have that passion? Like if they're staying home and like texting their friends on the phone or playing video games or they're on Discord, they're not having those experiences of like going out on a date or sneaking out of the house and, you know, stealing dad's car, whatever, you know, all those things you did in a car when you were a teenager. That's just something I don't want to generalize about a generation, of course, but like that's just a question. When I look about this AV question, I just think about how our generational consumer taste change.
Okay, so this John would say this, but I'll say it before he does. So Uber is going to get 50,000 vehicles from Rivian. Okay, so then I looked at
robotaxis.
Sorry. So I looked at Uber's site, and so today they announced that there's they're working with a company Vern and Pony AI in Europe. For the first commercial robotaxi service in Europe, it's going to begin in Zagreb. And what's interesting, they're using the Arctic Fox Alpha T5 robotaxi.
Whoa.
This comes from BAIC.
Yeah.
Yep.
Arctic Fox.
Uber is
Then on
with
March 3rd, so this is the 26th. On March 13th, they announced a deal with Motional, the Hyundai company, for robotaxis in Las
Did you
Vegas.
hear this? All these robotaxi companies.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, it's coming.
March 11th. Okay, so now we've got March 11th. Wave, Uber, and Nissan memorandum of understanding for robotaxis.
And in the middle of there, Lucid said that Uber is also going to take the midsize as well as the Gravity. So they're more out of Lucid as well.
March 11th, Uber announced a deal with Zoox. They'll be using that. Then late last year, Stellantis had 5,000 NVIDIA powered autonomous vehicles for Uber.
First of all, just robotaxi announcements after again, like I'm not that they're not going to, I mean, I'm just I always like, I keep a grain of salt with all these announcements because I've seen this movie before. Not that there isn't real progress happening, but to me, that is indicative. I don't know what that says about consumer demand. What that says is Uber feels like it needs to hurry up and get more cars deployed so it can keep up with Waymo and Tesla on technology. That doesn't mean that everybody doesn't want to own a car. It just means that tech companies are throwing money at a new technology to try to maintain their edge, which is different.
And Uber's doing it interestingly because they're buying technology and buying the cars. Like you guys figure out how to make it work. You just show it up and you put it on the thing. But you know, there's still open questions about whether it's, you know, whether it's profitable, right? Uber is in doing this, they're switching from paying
Pony
people.
AI just posted a profit in the fourth quarter.
Finally.
Now they have
long have they been
lost.
doing this?
They first started running robotaxis 2021. That was their first ones. So here we are, 2026, and so they're profitable in their fourth quarter. Now it's not a big profit, but they already have turned the corner.
Good. We need to see that.
So
Okay.
Because there's still like
Where's Waymo on that?
Waymo doesn't release
They don't
any
talk about
it.
financials, right?
They don't
so
talk
the,
about it.
the beauty of Pony
and,
is it's
and
publicly
Waymo
traded.
has also said, come back to the point of affordability. Waymo has also said that they're finding that people are perfectly happy to pay 10% more than the regular ride hailing fee to get the autonomous car. That's another question that I have for this: is does it actually turn out to be cheaper than ride hailing?
There's no competition. Wait till there's multiple companies offering robo-taxi rides. Then you'll see the cost come down.
Well, let me think about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It depends on if the business model works. You still have a very expensive piece of machinery that you have to own. You still have an expensive piece of machinery that has plenty of deadheading time. You still have to manage.
I think DD says it's selling its fully equipped robo-taxis for under 40 grand.
Okay,
And
that's China. You can't
that's
compare
China.
China,
That's
to the
China.
other
Right.
market-based economies.
and China is definitely full steam ahead on this.
Yeah.
They've got, 10 times the number of people that we do. So there's a little bit different transportation dynamic.
4 times the people.
Four times the people.
And
So
if you're just talking the U.S. versus China.
Yeah. So it's a completely different dynamic as well.
Yeah, but just to the question about Uber and will it be cheaper, let's just look at the history of Uber so far. Again, I lived in New York City for 10 years. I remember when there was very fierce ride sharing competition and it was like a price war and you could get great deals. And then, once it becomes less crowded, all of a sudden, we have surge pricing. If it's raining, if it's, after midnight on a Saturday, it's not cheaper. I end up going back to the gypsy cabs and back to the old school guys because they're cheaper than the ride hailing. So I would not put any faith that it's going to be cheaper. I don't know.
You decide you
I
want
just don't
to
know.
use Uber because you want to go to a concert and it's more expensive because everybody
Right, it's
wants
not
to go to the
cheaper.
concert. So how is that?
Yeah.
Well, because you went to the concert and you drove your own car, then you had to pay for parking. This way.
Yeah, I still maintain. Wait till you have, more than one ride hailing.
Well, we have to.
More than one
How would you
robo-taxi company in the market.
But even that
Agree.
could be
It's gonna
temporary
change.
period.
Yeah.
It could. Hey, look, we got to take a quick commercial break for our sponsors right now. Let's go to that. We'll get back to all these other things we're talking about.
This is great. I got 2 picking on you now, then not just me.
Making a life full of memories, one road trip at a time. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Weather Peak Tires with a 70,000-mile limited warranty.
The automotive industry continues to evolve, and so do the opportunities to define it. BorgWarner, one of the world's most admired companies, gets its partners where they need to go. Let's do something big, together.
All right, we're back talking about, or are we arguing about everything going on in the industry? Gabrielle, you recently had a story in Bloomberg that was really interesting about automakers who put billions of dollars into making EV battery plants. I'm talking largely in the US right now, going, slamming on the brakes, but they've got these sunk investments and now they're pivoting to make batteries for data storage.
Yeah, it's been really remarkable. It's funny how the estimates for this business have been so far off, so are always off base. So, there was an overestimation of how much demand there would be for EVs. All this capacity was built for battery plants, in part, incentivized by the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, and all the subsidies you could get by building batteries in the U.S. And everyone, even though we're seeing all these, painful billions of dollars in write-downs for EVs, the AI data center, but it's not just AI, because there's also questions about the bubble, around AI. But even for that story, I was talking to LG, they said, even if, the AI bubble pops, we still need to, build out the grid, make it more resilient, make it more efficient. And all that requires batteries. So, look, it doesn't take away the pain of all the money they already wrote off on EVs, but it is kind of a nice thing to pivot to. It's kind of saving their bacon a little bit. Certainly for LG, it's been amazing to watch how quickly they are converting all these plants from EV to stationary storage.
But it's not a flick of the switch, right? There's some significant changes in the plants that have got to take place.
There are. Yeah.
It was on the chemistry, right?
Yeah, but even with this, for example, that plant, there's the Spring Hill plant, Ultium in Tennessee. I think they went from making a nickel-based battery for cars to a lithium iron phosphate LFP battery. And there's some pieces of the plant that have to change, of course, but there are some pieces that don't have to change. I mean, they said it's about 10 to 20% cost to retool it and do that. And and it's not like it started this year. I think LG's been retooling. They saw the writing on the wall and started, redeploying things. People were selling out of the JVs, things like that.
But I thought was interesting is that I looked into it, and so the 45X advanced manufacturing tax credit still applies. So just as when the car companies were building batteries for EVs and the government was giving them money, they can build batteries for data centers or just other stationary storage applications, and the government gives them money.
The money's still there.
It's pretty remarkable.
I didn't
The
know that.
consumer lost their tax credit, but the companies did not lose their tax credit because a lot of these plants are built in red states where they have a lot of jobs that depend on these new investments, and they don't want to see that go away. And you could really argue it is in our national interest to build out a battery supply chain. That's almost a bipartisan issue that we need to decouple from China and make more stuff here. And this is the way to keep these plants going. That's good. But it is kind of funny, like, oh, okay, I can, people can't buy an EV and get $7,500 off anymore, but the companies are still getting subsidized to make batteries.
There was something in there that they did with One Big Beautiful Act. They did reduce the availability of the 45X. They changed the times factor on it, I believe, for some of that. But
I think they were just, what they did is they made it tougher to have Chinese content. There were loopholes in the subsidies where if you could get the credit, even if you had Chinese material in your supply chain, that didn't apply that applied to the consumer tax credit. But for this 45X, there was no strings attached.
And 45X is what?
Is the subsidy for battery
45X.
manufacturing
Okay.
for with Spring Hill would get
pack.
any battery plant cranking out batteries, whether it's for EVs or for stationary storage. I'm going to screw up the numbers. I don't want to say it's something per kilowatt.
It was per kilowatt.
It was per kilowatt hour.
And then it was and then the pack.
But now there's
on top of that
stricter anti-China strings attached to that, which is a really big boon to LG and is a pain in the neck for CATL, which has been very dominant in that market, and of course is Ford's partner as well. So that they kept them, but they changed some of the strings attached.
Right, and CATL has no manufacturing in the United States right now, so it doesn't really matter for them.
But indirectly, Ford's licensing their
technology,
and they sell a lot of batteries. I guess they're exported from, but they sell a lot of batteries to people who use them for stationary storage.
Right, but they're not making them here, so they wouldn't get the money from the 45X.
Well, I mean, this is something that's debated in Congress. There are China hawks who don't like the smell of it, but yes, you could say, it goes to Ford, and then indirectly CATL is getting paid, through their licensing and royalty contract with Ford to license their technology to build batteries in the U.S.
So, what hits me though, with you saying this, look at the billions that GM and Ford and Stellantis have written off on their EV investments. But obviously they haven't written off these battery plants, right? I mean, if the battery plants are pivoting to make LFP for energy storage.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
Some of the write-downs have been announced that are coming over a couple of years, and they're covering it's not always clear exactly what that total add up sum is. And it's interesting seeing the switch to ESS. And we don't track ESS as closely, but
what's ESS?
Energy storage service. Sorry.
Okay.
System. Yeah.
And but there's very likely going to be overcapacity in that sector. As a result of all these changes. And even with the changes that we know of those moving around, we're still over capacity for EVs and the available battery space. The other thing is that if they do pivot, as they pivot the plants to energy storage solutions instead of automotive batteries, one of the reasons that Ford and GM would like to do that and not give up all of their plants is because while it would take a little bit of time and a little money to reconvert it back, it can be done. So if GM, gives up one of their plants to LG, but they keep the other one, they do still have some skin in the game. They do still have a battery plant.
And they've got the workforce there. They've got the people trained to work on it.
Point.
It's like, that there's a benefit to that.
There is a benefit
so
to
when
that.
you were working on the story, I mean, do you have any sense of how the customers would feel about buying a battery from a General Motors or a Ford versus buying a battery from a Panasonic or
I don't think they
LG
are.
Energy
I think
Solution.
I don't think they are. Like in the case of that deal with LG and GM in Tennessee, the Ultium, which is the joint
Ultium,
venture
yep.
between GM and LG, is making cells. But then LG itself has a it's called Vertec. They have a business that sells. So it's the person who the brand that's selling the batteries to all these utilities, or it's not GM. It's the same company they've always dealt with that had provided them batteries.
What do you think, Gary? Will the customer care who made the battery in their car?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it occurred to me at one point that maybe this would be beneficial for it to be badged General Motors or Ford. We make stuff that's reliable. We built Ford Tough, and this would be the battery system that you're buying, and you'd be like, yeah,
I don't think
my company is better. We've got Ford.
I mean, Tesla does it.
Yeah.
Tesla,
Yeah.
they have, the pack, for charging. They have a branded, but that's a whole. They developed all that at once. Here's an electric car. Here's your charging system. Here's the supercharger network. It was all kind of a branded thing that was brought out together.
So, I mean, does Tesla sell batteries for energy storage? So stationary applications? I mean, not for houses. I'm talking about.
No. They've got
both,
huge
yeah.
ones.
Okay, and it's branded Tesla.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys are making fun of me for saying it ought to be branded Ford?
I'm not saying it can't be
I'm making
branded
fun
Ford.
of you.
I think
outraged.
Tesla has got the brand name that could carry that off.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd see
Built
general
Ford Tough.
consumers running out to buy a Ford, or even GM. GM's trying to get into home energy systems too.
I think they have a lot of work to do in establishing credibility on that front.
So I was very interested. I was reading about how General Motors decided to get into refrigerators, and it ran Frigidaire for 60 years.
Oh, yeah.
60 years.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
See?
Yeah.
Quality manufacturing. That's why they were able to do that.
Yeah.
Just like
we
now.
gotta,
Just like now.
Yeah, we got to get, yeah.
Well, that brings in the whole another great topic: buy or make. Should you buy the technology as an automaker or make it? And what triggered that thought is going back to what we were talking about earlier: Uber buying vehicles from Rivian, because Rivian developed its own tech stack. And then wasn't it Nissan is going to buy NVIDIA's tech stack for its AVs? And this whole argument runs out. When does it make sense to buy? When does it make sense to bring it in-house? I would say if it's hypercritical to the customer and you've got economies of scale, do it in-house. Otherwise, outsource it.
And again, so it comes down to what's right for what product and what's right for what company and what's right for their strategy. There isn't a one answer. It depends.
But isn't there also a question of
always it's depends.
Well, let's stick with AV technology right now.
All right. So John, okay, Rivian did this, but okay, Rivian was a startup.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rivian was funded by Amazon by
and
and
Rivian's
large.
not at L4 yet.
And so yes, they design all this stuff. Okay, but does a legacy automaker have the wherewithal to compete with NVIDIA? I say no.
I would agree with you.
Okay, therefore,
right. That's kind of where I was going to go.
So therefore, it would seem to me the thing I think is troublesome is that if we look at what the traditional automakers have been doing, I mean, the General Motors just announced that they're running tests of their eyes off, hands off, level 3 stuff going on, and that at some point Waymo's going to go, you know what? I'll sell you a package, and it'll have everything you need for L4. Skip that L3 nonsense. We're going to go straight to L4, and it's in this nice little box, and it's got the processor, and it's got the sensors, LiDAR, cameras. It's got all you need, and it's going to cost you $200.
But Waymo's going to go to who? GM or the customer?
GM.
Well, I think this has been playing out already for years, but the car companies, they know that data is the new oil, to use that kind of cliched phrase, and so they know they've got a lot of data inside the car and they don't want to give it up, and so I think that, and not to mention all these future business models for car companies where they're going to have services revenue and it's going to come from things like that, Blue Cruise and whatnot, or sorry, is that the Ford? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super Cruise.
Super Cruise. I'm so sorry. so that's a big part of the strategy is to do it themselves.
And there's elements to the software stack. It's not one thing. It's not this one little software stack that they pick up from NVIDIA and stick on the front of a GM. There's multiple components, there's multiple developments. So it isn't one stack that's off the shelf. Even Waymo's
So
buying
you don't think
them
Jensen's going to put this together as a package and sell that to people? No. Oh, I think he
Oh,
will.
he's doing it.
Wow.
Because Nissan announced that it's taking NVIDIA's AV tech stack.
I know, but there's still elements to that that is working with other parts to the vehicle. It's not as simple as one
All
stack.
right, you got
just
10
sitting
guys
out.
over there working on
Yeah,
this other stuff. and-
The software stack doesn't include the sensors. It doesn't necessarily include the LiDAR. It's
That's
the
correct.
software,
That's
right?
correct.
So
It's
that's
the-
something. The system is not a one-piece system. It's a system with 4 layers, 5 layers on it.
Yeah, right.
So it's not really, we hear that they're buying a software stack or they bought this part of technology from Mobileye or by that part of technology, and we're not talking about it very precisely. And there's bits and pieces to it
Look,
that come
the
together
sensors
to
are
build the
important,
system.
but you can buy different sensors from different suppliers.
Sure.
And the tech stack, the way that Rivian describes it, starts with the chip.
It starts with the chip.
They designed the chip.
It starts with
You
the
know,
chip.
I know Tesla does design
own
of its
chip.
own chips. I believe NIO and Xiaomi do. I don't think anybody else does. I don't know. And this gets back to the make versus buy.
How much money has Rivian made?
None. None.
It's-
Zero.
But
It took
curious.
Tesla a decade to make any money
Well, I'm
whatsoever.
just saying that, he's making this argument that all this vertical integration is so marvelous, but they haven't made any money.
No, I'm saying if I were an automaker and wanted to get into the AV business right now, I'd go buy it. It's done. It's there. Why should I waste my time?
I think
doing
there's
it?
that though. There was Argo AI. There was GM bought
GM Cruise.
Cruise.
GM bought
Like I
Cruise
mean,
and GM
they
bought-
already tried that, and
They
then they were
did.
like, "Oops, this is too expensive and too hard. We can't do it."
Yeah, they were too
They
early.
didn't.
Just like
they were too
EVs.
early. They weren't quite ready. And I would argue that they didn't really say that it was too expensive. They wouldn't do it. What GM ran into the problem with, there was a couple of problems with Cruise, right? There was the accident that just went very badly.
Had
and
bad
there's
PR around
bad
it too.
PR around
Mhm.
it. It exposed some situations within the company that they weren't being within Cruise wasn't being as transparent as it needed to be. So you did that whole change, and GM looked at it eventually and said, "Wait a second, like we're not in the ride hailing business. Let's close that off. Let's bring this stuff in house, and let's look at it on a personal level." So in 28, they'll be at level 3. They're on their way to. Well, ultimately, they want to do it in a different way. But they didn't just throw the technology away and say, "Forget it. We can't do it ourselves. We give up."
So here's a
and
question
same with
for you.
Ford.
Remember Dan Ammon was running
do. Yeah.
GM Cruise. He wanted to take the company public.
Yeah.
He wanted it spun out of GM.
Yeah.
Mary Barra said no.
Nope.
Dan was given the boot.
Mm.
What if Cruise had gone public? What if it had gone strictly as away from GM as a robo-taxi company?
I maintain that one of the reasons Waymo is where it is because it's got Alphabet. Like Waymo has an seemingly endless source of money. Cruise by itself would not have had that.
But Waymo still raises money like venture
do still
capital
raise
money and
money.
all that stuff too.
But
They're
I-
not just
I-
using Google's money.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that Cruise
Could they have done the Rivian model and sell their architecture to Volkswagen, sell it to Uber?
Cruise, not if they would.
No.
Yeah, I mean, but then GM would
that
be
wasn't
sharing
said.
its technology with competitors.
if it went public.
Well, Rivian's sharing it with Volkswagen and sharing it with.
Well, and there's a different.
Yeah, but they have a
that's
part. Yeah,
and it's not the AV part yet that they're sharing.
Yet.
But I think that GM was right to keep Cruise. I think if you take a longer term view, say robotaxis are great, say autonomous, we get there. In 2035, it's going to matter. And it already does in that they are using that technology and they're using the engineers and using the things they've learned to get to the level 3 that's going to get them da-da-da-da. So I think on a long-term basis, GM was smart to keep that technology for themselves.
Remember all those pictures that Ford used to put out of those Ford Fusions delivering Domino's pizzas autonomously? I wonder what ever happened to those.
Do you remember side note, do you remember the Domino's Chevrolet Volt EVs?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't.
There's a Domino's.
We had them in
across
the
street.
studio.
Yeah.
There's a Domino's across this, like right down the street from my house. It's still running at least 2 of those.
So I remember
Domino's logo.
It was a
everything.
Chevrolet
Spark.
Spark.
It was a Spark EV.
And it was the conversions were done by Roush in Livonia.
Okay.
They're using the seat heater.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. They took the seat heater out of the passenger front seat and
Wow.
used that in the little oven in the back of the car to keep the pizzas hot.
That's funny.
There's at least 2 of those still in operation.
That's cool. I want a pizza from that.
Yeah, right.
All right, so let's combine. So this was a topic that you wanted to talk about, John, and so we're going to combine things that we've just been discussing since the top of the show, practically about so the deal that General Motors has with SAIC in China runs out
Next year.
next year.
That agreement expires.
Should they keep it going?
Ooh.
I guess.
I can argue both sides.
Yeah. Let's hear the
so-
argument. No. You go, you go.
So here's my argument. If GM were to go it alone, now it's its own boss. Now it keeps all the money that it makes in China. Right now, remember, they only get equity payments out of SAIC. And boy, that's dropped off a cliff because GM sales have gone down. But they'd be steering the car, so to speak. On the other hand, China, the Communist Party runs everything, right? And having a Chinese partner runs a lot of interference for you, especially as an American company in China with growing antagonism between the US and China. And so maybe you decide, SAIC, we don't really need them, but man, it's a great insurance policy. I don't know that's,
Could they still operate in China if they got rid of their partner?
absolutely. Yeah, now
Yeah.
you can. China has lifted that requirement. You no longer have to have a joint venture partner.
So-
Tesla doesn't have one.
But that was sort of a special.
Well, Tesla broke the ice.
They broke the ice. They were the first one to take advantage of it.
There's
when-
other OEMs that have taken advantage of it since, right?
So would
Actually, I don't think
would
so.
your favorite Wuling Mini, whatever it's called, still exist? I mean, I understand that
Yeah,
Wuling is
look.
not SAIC, but
Right.
SAIC and Wuling would be able to make that car. And
Yeah,
say,
well, look,
that hell, General Motors.
That car, what do they sell for? Under $5,000. The last I looked at Wuling's financials, they were making about $20 profit per vehicle. So GM's equity income coming out of
Little here, little
Wuling
there.
is,
pieces of money.
we could put the spare change in our pocket.
But we're only looking at the GM side of it. Does SAIC want to stay in a partnership with GM?
That's a great question.
That's my
Ooh,
question.
That's a really good
I don't
question.
know. I have no special insight to that, but I'm just looking at the Chinese companies used to need foreign car makers.
Now they don't.
I don't know that they really do anymore. I mean, so I guess that's just the question. I don't have answers. Sorry, but that's my question: is what's
Yeah.
in it for SAIC? What would be in it for SAIC?
Who ends
to
up
stay?
owning Paytech? Who ends up
That's
owning
the Pan Asia Technical
Pan Asia
Automotive
Technical-
Center.
Yeah, where they're doing the design and engineering. Who
Yeah.
ends up owning that? That's the answer to the question.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah,
SAIC?
GM would not want to give that up,
No.
because it wants to have access to Chinese technology.
And then
know-how.
Buicks out in China now are basically predicated on SAIC, and
Yeah.
that's their big brand in China. So if SAIC is like, you don't have
It
that
depends on
platform
how much
anymore.
money GM has to
Goodbye.
spend to stay.
Well, look, it looks like they've bottomed out in China.
Yeah,
They've had, I don't know how many months, 13 months of sales going up
Yep.
slightly. Now it's now where they were a decade ago,
Mm.
but they don't want to give up on China. In fact, I don't think any of the
Nobody
foreign
wants to give up.
automakers want to give up on China. They want to fight their way back.
Yeah.
If you readjust for like this version of it versus what it was before, and you can still find it a way. And there still is equity income. I mean, it might not be a lot, but it's still equity income that
Right.
you
It
can
is,
work
but
through,
I
and
would
it's-
maintain that's all coming from SAIC. I doubt GM's getting much of
I think more
anything
important than that,
from
though, is
Wuling.
that like what you mentioned about access to technology and just being in the Chinese market and understanding what's happening there.
Yeah.
That seems like not that it saved anybody the first time around, right? They've all been there for years and they somehow didn't, adapt to be able to stay. They weren't prepared for what was coming with the likes of BYD and Xiaomi and all these other startups. But I feel like it seems like every car company these days feels like they have to have some sort of partnership with China, whether in China or outside of China, in
Yeah.
order to be able to compete. That seems to be the conversation that we're having now, is just as a global auto industry.
Mhm.
Look at Stellantis and Leap Motor. Okay, they did, everybody's trying to arrange something.
Yeah, I wouldn't rush out to kill it.
Yeah.
All right. So talking about competitive companies, we'll bring it back to the United States. So at the Hyundai Motor Company, General shareholder meeting today, Jose Munoz announced that from 2026 now to 2030, Hyundai plans to introduce 36 all-new or significantly enhanced models in the United States.
Wow.
And it wants more than 80% of the vehicles that it sells in the US to be built domestically by 2030. And it wants its supply chain content to be US from 60% to 80%.
Wow, we sure are lucky we have the world's second biggest car market to make all these companies want to invest here. Because a lot of other countries would love to have that, and they just don't have the market to.
They don't.
So I mean, Hyundai's got, their design and the vehicles they're putting out there, are just sensational. So how do the companies that are here going to feel about that?
Well, they better have their hair on fire because, we talked earlier in the show about Toyota expanding production capacity in the United States. Toyota's about 300,000 units a year behind GM in the U.S. market. I don't know off the top of my head how far behind the Hyundai Group, including Kia and Genesis, is behind the Ford Motor Company. It's probably about a similar gap, I'm guessing.
I don't remember.
You don't know
right
off
now.
the top of your head?
I know I checked the rankings now and again, but I don't know what the volume difference is.
Yeah, I don't
but
remember what
all
the
I'm
volume
getting at is I can paint a picture that before the decade is over, two of the top 3 automakers in the U.S. market will be Asian.
Could be.
Toyota will be number 1, GM will be number 2, Hyundai Kia number 3, displacing Ford.
It could happen. But some of that, what Jose talked about today, wasn't necessarily. They are looking for some capacity increase. So I'm not saying there's none, but you can have 80% sold here and 80% sourced here and still be at the same level. So I think they will grow, but part of it is just where the sourcing is, and the flip side of that is there's a plant somewhere else. It's not going to build something.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
So that. Not that they won't do these things, but that is the other flip side.
How many
is
new
whatever
models
they're importing
is Ford going to introduce in the time frame that Hyundai's
3?
going to bring 36?
4?
How many is GM going to introduce in that time frame? And this business, the new stuff sells the best.
Yeah.
Always does, always has.
Yeah.
And when we look at those, we were talking about this a little bit before the show too, is some of those models will be, a new engine line. Some of them is going to be a new trim line.
The hybrid version versus the ICE version.
And an extended range. And
ICE,
the commercial van, which is the
EVs,
GM
EREVs.
Hyundai commercial van project, by the way. The commercial van.
Oh yeah,
that's
they
right.
are
That's
right.
right.
They're working together. Yeah.
They're working together on that. So there's a lot there, but you're right. It comes down to product, and you bring up Ford, and Ford has not got a lot of new product coming necessarily. They're really sticking with filling out more trucks and filling out more utility vehicles, and I think there's opportunity for not sedans to come back to 20-30% or whatever, but there's opportunity for a little bit more of that, and Ford just is not prepared for that. They're not prepared for deciding that everybody really wants a pickup bed. No, really, not everybody wants a pickup bed. I swear to God, it's true. And they're not.
Heretic.
I know. They're not fully prepared for that. So I think there's some gaps in Ford's space that they don't have enough product coming in. Poor Lincoln just keeps getting, every time you delay another Ford product, you've delayed another Lincoln product by a couple of years. And so there's a product cadence issue at Ford.
Well, that's not just them, right? A lot of companies spend a lot of money on EV development and then had to cancel it. So they're not ready to just pull 10 more rabbits out of their hat,
Figuring out how to make your ICE a little bit run a little bit longer and refresh those and maybe run that platform another cycle.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that happening too.
Yeah. We're going to have to wrap this up.
Wow,
We're out of time, unfortunately. But Gabrielle Coppola coming from Bloomberg, Stephanie Brinley from S&P Global Mobility.
Bingo.
Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Very good.
It was good. Good. I want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey. And by Borg Warner. The automotive industry continues to evolve, and so do the opportunities to define it. Borg Warner, one of the world's most admired companies, gets partners where they need to go. Let's do something big together.